Ray Comfort has just released a movie called Evolution vs. God. Here, I'm going to roundly refute the most popular rebuttal to Comfort's movie. I thought this would be a good opportunity to refute some misconceptions people have about creation and evolution. And by the way, since this is very important, I use the word evolution to mean the theory that all life is descended from a single common ancestor. Okay, so let's get started.
Well, first of all, I don't really think that that's what atheism means. Atheism is just the lack of a belief in God.
The typical definition of atheism in philosophy is the stance or affirmation that there is no God. Lack of belief in God says nothing about whether God exists or not. It simply describes the psychological state of a person. So if you want to use this definition for atheism, then be my guest. But it doesn't even remotely challenge theism. It says nothing about the issue.
At a minute and 20, he puts up a quote claiming that evolution is dinosaurs turning into birds, apes into humans, and amphibious mammals into whales. Now, I follow Richard Dawkins on Twitter, and he's said a few things like this. One says, I've actually read a tweet by somebody who thinks a monkey needs to give birth to a human in order to demonstrate evolution. Seriously. It's not something that can just happen like that. It's a long process. The transition from apes to humans is probably something that took around 5 to 6 million years.
Did Comfort say that it happens overnight? Not at all. He said that evolution can turn apes into humans, so that could be overnight or over millions of years.
But just because you can't see it happening, just because you can't observe the millions and millions of years it takes for these things to happen, doesn't mean they didn't happen.
That's not the argument. Comfort argues that because we don't observe it, evolution isn't true science. It's a historical model just like creationism. No informed creationist ever says that because we don't observe millions of years of evolution, that therefore it isn't true. So that seems to be a straw man on your part.
And maybe there isn't 100% proof, but science is still working on that. You can't just say, I don't know, so therefore God.
Again, another straw man. No informed theist ever says that because we don't understand something, therefore God. We say, because we do understand the universe around us, therefore God. Take for example the Kalam cosmological argument, which is a positive argument arguing from the truth of the universe's beginning and the fact that something cannot come from absolutely nothing.
But my point is even though you can't see direct proof of every single little tiny detail, that doesn't mean that there isn't a huge mountain of evidence in support of it.
Yes, the huge mountain of evidence. Nothing that hasn't already been refuted.
So let me get this straight. They're using the I can't see it, so it ain't there argument.
No. Comfort is saying because we don't see evolution, therefore it isn't a true scientific theory, or, God forbid, a fact. It's a historical model that draws off inferences about what the world was like in the past.
A ring species is when a parent population radiates around some kind of central barrier, and by the time the descendants meet on opposite sides, they have changed way too much to reproduce. So there you go. There is an observable change of kind for you, Ray Comfort. It's observable. It's been proven. There's tons of evidence for it.
Some may argue that evolutionists need to show one kind changing into another kind, but this isn't a good idea. In order for microbes to evolve into man, new genetic information must be added along the way. By the way, it's not just new DNA, it's new information which has meaning. In any event, none of the changes we observe add genetic information. It's always lost or rearranged. So such examples of ring species and so forth don't really demonstrate the process of evolution. So the issue here is not the size of change, but rather the type of change.
And just because I can't show you millions and millions of years doesn't mean it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a ton of evidence supporting the fact that it did.
Another straw man, and the typical mantra that there is tons or millions of pieces of evidence.
Almost all the sequences are identical. A very tiny number of genotypical differences can account for the large number of phenotypical differences. And by phenotype, I mean things that we can see or what we look like. And many genomes have been sequenced. We can draw clear conclusions to our relation to other species and the relation between other species.
The typical similarities argument. Similarities between organisms' DNA is just as much evidence for a common designer as it is for a common ancestor. Oh, and by the way, To say that similarities between organisms is evidence for evolution commits the logical fallacy of affirming the consequent.
But that's not enough. They want more evidence. They want to see the fossils. They want to see the missing link. Well, unfortunately, a very small number of corpses actually fossilize and are preserved. You know, we don't even need that. We could easily have had no fossils at all, and the evidence from molecular genetics and geographical location would still overwhelmingly support the theory of evolution.
Fossils cannot be evidence for evolution because we cannot tell if one fossil is related to another. Even similarities between fossils do not show relationship, since similarities are present in many supposedly trivially related animals.
If even one fossil, were found in the wrong geographical stratum, if it were found in the wrong place, the entire theory would just be blown out of the water. It would be entirely disproved by locating one fossil in the wrong place.
Not at all. The theory of evolution would be remolded in order to fit with this new fossil. Take for example the Laetoli footprints.
And now we're going to get into the origin of everything ever, something from nothing, and this is something that I wanted to talk about a long time ago, but I never made the video because it would take me forever, so I'm going to try to explain it as quickly and as simply as I possibly can. Physicists are still working on the origin of the cosmos, one of which is Lawrence Krauss. He has a book out that I recommend to anyone who actually wants the finer details. But the most simplified explanation I can give is that when you have matter and antimatter and you put them together, they cancel each other out, leading to nothing. Krauss is suggesting that you can start with nothing and reverse that process, making matter and antimatter.
The problems with this is that most of the antimatter is missing from the universe, and when matter and antimatter collide, they do not produce nothing but energy.
Now this brings up the typical God of the gap strategy. Creationists eagerly seek a gap in present-day knowledge or understanding, and if an apparent gap is found, it's assumed that God, by default, must fill it.
Again, not at all. It's because of what we do know that God must exist, not what we don't know. No informed theist uses the God of the gaps argument.
And in my opinion, one of the truly bad effects of religion is that it teaches us that it's a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding.
Don't you mean satisfied with not understanding in a naturalistic way? I could turn the tables. Atheism teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding because you don't know how the supernatural could have done it. This is just rubbish. You groundlessly assume naturalism is the premier explanation for everything, and it always trumps the supernatural.
And again, you see the unwarranted use of a default. If there's no fossil document to a postulated evolutionary transition, the default assumption is that there was no evolutionary transition. Therefore, God must have intervened.
Again, this is not the case. We say that because there are no good transitional fossils for essentially all of the evolutionary tree of life, therefore, there is no indication of evolution happening in the fossils. No one ever says that this proves God. I'm seriously wondering where all this information comes from, because it's certainly not true.
At 27 minutes and 10 seconds, he goes up to people and says, "You're only atheist because it erases all of your moral accountability," which is something that can obviously only be found in the Bible, right? I don't think so. If you take a look at Leviticus 20:13, it says homosexuals must be put to death.
So why are you judging the Bible's morality with your own? If the Bible is the standard for morality, then you cannot criticize it with your own, because yours would be wrong. So you've basically committed circular reasoning. So was this a good rebuttal of Ray Comfort's video, Evolution versus God? Not at all. It's riddled with elementary logical errors and, well, just stuff that's simply not true.